Hello. So, I want to just stress that this idea that I'm going to be partaking in tonight is a bit odd. I asked for ideas from a fan that I know. I'll be shouting out quickly before I'll shout out by the end of this. So, this video idea was brought by her. It was a selection of ideas that she gave, and a good few that I thought were alright, I could do another time, but one that caught my attention was this. A Trizty sort of reading thing, because she had an idea, because she'd seen in my videos that I'd been reading before, and she thought, why not do an audio sort of thing? Audiobook in a way. So I thought I'd do it like this. Now, here are the things I can guarantee for a start. I can guarantee you'll be getting to hear me reading books up to certain chapters for as long as I can. Maybe 3 in total, and I'll keep on going until the book ends, and then I'll put it all in a wee list. I can guarantee that it's mainly going to be audio, so don't expect any visuals, unfortunately. How that'll work out is I'd probably recommend that you try and watch this having your phone to the side while the video is playing, and just listen. And the thing I cannot guarantee is that if this video will go well. Because one thing I do know is that books are meant to be heard or read to give knowledge or to drag you into a world. They don't come free. Audiobooks are paid for by a lot of people in storybooks. So I can't guarantee if this will stay and strong well. Because I know that frankly the books I'll be reading, they're not mine, I can guarantee that. None of these books are mine. So that's what people at YouTube might get out my arse for. So none of these books are mine, YouTube. None of them are mine. I can't write books to that extent. But what they will catch on for is reading stuff for free. You'll be hearing me read these books for free, and YouTube might not like that. So if this does get taken down, then unfortunately this idea will not work. So that's all I can say. That's a bad thing. Now onto the shout out. Big Doggo E. What was the name? I was given the name to describe her. I can't use her actual name because she wanted to keep it confidential. Oh, there we go. Shout out to my homie E-Dog. Yes, I know that's a bit odd, but that's what we're going for. So, that's it. That'll be the announcement that you're going to be seeing. And the rest of the video is this exact video. The idea, should I say. Trizty bedtime stories. But they're not bedtime stories. They're not kids' stories. They're more so just videos of me reading that you can listen to, if you wish. And the book that I've chosen tonight, you can't read that, can you? Okay. The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Masterwork. So, if you want to stay around and listen to the video, you may. If you don't want to, that's entirely up to you. I am okay with criticism. Until then, I hope you enjoy or have a good day.
Hello, and welcome to Trizty Bedtime Stories. Today, tonight, this morning, this afternoon, this evening, whatever time it is for you, we'll be experiencing the reading of The Hobbit, read by Trizty. The book itself is by J.R.R. Tolkien, published in 1937. I hope you're comfortable, wherever you are, listening, toning in, sitting by a bed, by a chair. If you're not comfy, I will give you 10 seconds to make sure that you're comfortable wherever you are, starting now. There. Are you comfy? Hopefully. If not, you come back, 10 seconds back, keep on going until you are comfortable and ready to listen. If so, and are ready, then we shall begin with the first chapter. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Party. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It had a perfectly round door, like a porthole, painted green, with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened onto the tube-shaped hall like a tunnel. A very comfortable tunnel without smoke, with panelled walls and floors tiled and carpeted, fried with polished chairs and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The hobbit was fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly but not quite straight into the side of the hill. The hill, as other people were for many miles round called it, and the many little round doors open of it, first on one side and then the other. No going upstairs for the hobbit. Bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, lots of these. Wardrobes, he had whole rooms devoted to clothes. Kitchens, dining rooms were all on the same floor, indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left-hand side, going in, for those who were only one to have windows. Set round windows looking over his garden, and meadows beyond slopping down to the river. This hobbit was a very well-to-do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses had lived in the neighbourhood of the hill for a time out of mind, and people considered them very respectable, not only because most of them were rich, but also because they never had any adventures or did anything unexpected. You could tell what a Baggins would say on any question without the bother of asking him. This is the story of how a Baggins had an adventure and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost the neighbours' respect, but he gained, well, you will see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of our particular hobbit, was it a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays, since they have become rare and shy of the big people, as they call us. They, or were a little people, about half our height and smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. There is little to no magic about them, except the ordinary everyday sort which helps them to disappear quietly and quickly when large stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making a noise like elephants which they can hear a mile off. They are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress in bright colours, chiefly green and yellow, wear no shoes, because their feet grow naturally leathery soles and thick, warm brown hair like the stuff on the heads, which is curling. Have long, clever brown fingers, good-natured faces, and laugh deep, fruity laughs, especially at dinner, which they have twice a day when they can get it. Now you know enough to go on with. As I was saying, the mother of this hobbit, Uncle Baggins, was the famous Belladonna Took, one of those three remarkable daughters of the old Took, head of the hobbits who lived across the water, the small river that ran at the foot of the hill. It was often said in other families that long ago one of the Took's ancestors would have taken a fairy wife. That was, of course, absurd, but certainly there was still something not entirely hobbit-like about them, and once in the whole members of the Took clan would go and have adventures. They discreetly disappeared, and the family hushed it up. But the fact remained that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses, though they were undoubtedly richer. Not that Belladonna Took ever had any adventures after she became Mrs. Bungo Baggins. Bungo, that was Bilbo's father, built the most luxurious hobbit hole for her, and partly with her money, that was to be found either under the hill or over the hill or across the water, and there they remained to the end of their days. Still, it is probable that Bilbo, her only son, although he looked and behaved exactly like a sick edition of his solid and uncomfortable father, got something a bit queer in his make-up from the Took side. Something that only waited for a chance to come out. The chance never arrived, until Bilbo Baggins was grown up. Being about 50 years old or so, and living in the beautiful hobbit hole built by his father, which I have just described for you, until he had, in fact, apparently settled down immovably. By some curious chance, one morning long ago in the quiet of the world, when there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, and Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast smoking an enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes, neatly brushed, Gandalf came down. Gandalf! If you had heard only a quarter of what I have heard about him, and I have only heard very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouted all over the place wherever he went, in the most extraordinary fashion. He had not been down that under the hill for ages and ages, not since his friend, the old Took, died. In fact, and the hobbits had almost forgotten what he looked like. He had been away over the hill and across the water on businesses of his own since they were all hobbit boys and hobbit girls. All that the unsuspecting Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall pointed blue hat, a long grey cloak, a silver scarf, which his long white beard hung down below his waist, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining and the grass was very green, but Gandalf looked at him from under low bushy eyes that stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it to be or not, or that you feel good this morning, or is that this morning to be good on?" "All of them," said Bilbo, "and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco outdoors. Into the bargain, if you have any pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry, we all have the day before us." Then Bilbo sat down on a seat by his door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful grey string of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking and floated away with the hill. "Very pretty," said Gandalf, "but I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I am looking for someone to share an adventure that I am arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone." "I should think in these parts we are plain quiet folk that have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things, eh? Make it late for dinner. I can't think of what anybody sees in them," said out Baggins. He stuck out one thumb behind his braces and blew out another even bigger smoking ring. Then he took out his morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no interest or more notice of the old man. He had decided that he was not quite his sort and wanted him to go away, but the old man did not move. He stood leaning on his stick and gazed at the hobbit without saying anything, till Bilbo got quite uncomfortable and looked across. "Good morning," he said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. We might try over the hill or across the water." By this he meant that the conversation was at an end. "What a lot of things to do use good mornings for," said Gandalf. "Now you mean that you want to get rid of me, and it won't be good till I move off?" Not at all, my dear sir. Let me see, I don't think I know your name." Yes, my dear sir. I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, and you do know my name. I don't remember that be that long ago. I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me. To think that I should have lived to be a good mongering by Belladonnath's Took's son, as I was selling buttons at the door. Gandalf! Good gracious me! Not the wandering wizard that grave old took a pair of magic diamond studs that fancied themselves and never came undone until ordered. Not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales as parties, about dragons and goblins and giants and the rescue of princesses and the unexpected luck of widows' sons. Not the man that used to make such particularly excellent fireworks. I remember those. Old Took used to have them in Midsummer's Eve. Splendid. They used to go up great lilas and snapdragons and labrahams of fire and hung in the twilight all evening. You will notice already that Mr. Baggins was not quite so prosy as he liked to behave. Also that he was not very fond of flowers. Dear me, he went on. Not the Gandalf who was responsible for so many quiet lads and lasses going off into the blue for mad adventures. Anyone climbing off a tree to visiting elves, or sailing in ships, sailing to other shores. Bless me, life used to be quite in here. I mean, you used to be upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, but I have no idea why you were still in business.
Why else should I be? Said the wizard. All the same, I am pleased to find you remember something about me. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly, at any rate. That is not without any hope. Indeed, for your old grandfather took sake, and for the sake of the old poor belladonna, I will give you what you asked for.
I beg your pardon?
I haven't asked for anything. Yes, you have. Twice now. My pardon. I give it to you all. In fact, I will go as far as to send you on this adventure. Very amusing for me. Very good for you. And profitable too. Very likely if you ever get over it.
Sorry, I don't want any adventures. Thank you. Not today. Good morning. But please come to tea anytime you like. Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye. With that, the hobbit turned and scuttled inside his round green door and started as quickly as he dared. Not to seem rude. Wizards, after all, are wizards. What on earth did I ask him to do to tea for? He said to himself as he went to the pantry. He had only just had breakfast, but he thought a cake or two and a drink of something would do him good after his fright. Gandalf, in the meantime, was still standing outside the door, and laughing long but quietly. After a while he stepped up, and with the spike of his staff scratched a queer sign on the hobbit's beautiful green front door. Then he strode away, just about the time when Bilbo was finishing his second cake and beginning to think that he had escaped adventures after all. The next day he had almost forgotten about Gandalf. He did not remember things very well, unless he put them down on his engagement tablet. Like this, Gandalf Tea Wednesday. Yesterday, he had been too flustered to do anything of the kind. Just before tea time, there came a tremendous ring on the front door, and he remembered. He rushed and put on the kettle and put another cup and saucer and an extra cake or two and ran to the door. "I'm sorry I kept you waiting," he was going to say when he saw that it was not Gandalf at all. It was a dwarf with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt, very bright eyes under his dark green hood. As the door was opened, he pushed him inside, just as he had been expected. He hung his hooded cloak on the nearest peg, and...
"Dwalin, at your service."
"Bilbo Baggins, at yours," said the hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for the moment. In the silence that followed had become uncomfortable. He added, "I am just about to take tea. Pray come and have some with me." A little stiff, perhaps, but he meant it kindly. What would you do if an uninvited dwarf came and hung his things up in your hall without a word of explanation? They had not been long at the table. In fact, they had hardly reached the third cake, when there came another, even louder ring at the door. "Excuse me," said the hobbit, and he went to the door. "Sorry you have got here at last." That was what he was going to say to Gandalf this time, but it was not Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf on the step with a white beard and a scarlet hood, and he too hopped inside as soon as the door was open, just as if he had been invited.
"I see they've begun to arrive early," he said when he caught sight of Dwalin's green hood hanging up. He hung his red one next to it. "Balin, at your service," he said with his hand on his breast.
"Thank you," said Bilbo with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but they had been begun to arrive and flushed him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived, and he preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, and then he, as the host, he knew his duty to stuck at it, however painful, he might have to go without. "Come along and have some tea," he managed to say after taking a deep breath. "A little beer would suit me better, if it's all the same to you, my good sir," said Balin with the white beard. "But I don't mind some cake. Seed cake, if you have any." "Ah, lots! Bilbo found himself answering, to his own surprise, and he found himself scuttling off to the cellar to find a pint of beer mug, and then to the pantry to fetch 2 beautiful round sea cakes, which he had baked that afternoon for his afternoon supper morsel. When he got back, Balin and Dwalin were talking at the table, like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake in front of them when loud ring came from the bell again, and then another ring. Gandalf, for certain this time, he thought, as he puffed along the passage. But it was not. It was 2 more dwarfs, both with blue hoods, silver belts, and yellow beards, and each of them carried a bag of tools and a spade. In they hopped, and as soon as the door began to open, Bilbo was hardly surprised at all. "What can I do for you, my dwarves?" he said. "I'm Killy, at your service," said the one. "And Philly," added the other, and they both swept off their blue hoods and bowed. "At yours and your families' services," replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time. "Dwal and Balin are here, I see," said Killy. "Let us join the throng." "Throng!" "Throng?" thought Mr. Baggins. "I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink." He held us a sip in the corner while the 4 dwarfs sat around the table and talked about mines and gold and troubles with the goblins and depredations of the dragons and lots of other things which he did not understand and did not want to, for they sounded much too adventurous, when ding-dong-a-ling-dang, his bell rang again, and as if some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. "Some at the door," he said, blinking. "Some 4. No, some 4, I should say by the sound," said Philly. "Besides, we saw them coming along behind us in the distance." The poor little hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands and wondered what had happened and what was going to happen, and whether they would all stay to supper. Then the bell rang louder and even ever, and he had to run to the door. It was not 4 after all, it was 5, and the dwarf had come along while he was wandering in the hall. He had hardly turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying, "At your service," one after the other. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, and Gloin were their names. And very soon 2 purple hoods, a grey hood, and a brown hood, and a white hood were all hanging on the pegs, and off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already it had almost become a throng. Some called for ale, and some for porter, and one for coffee, and all of them for cakes, so the hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had been set in the hearth, the seed cakes were gone, and the dwarfs were starting on a round of buttered scones, when there came a loud knock, not a ring, but a hard rat-tat on the hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage, very angry and altogether bewildered and befuddled. This was the most awkward Wednesday he had ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and all they fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarfs, 4 more, and there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out the secret mark that he had put there the morning before. "Carefully, carefully," he said. "It's not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat and then open the door like a pop gun. Let me introduce Biffa, Boffa, Bomber, and especially Thorin." "At your service," said Biffa, Boffa, Bomber, standing in the row. Then they hummed out the 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. This last belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf, in fact no older than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself. He was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat, with Boffer and Bomber on top of him. For one thing, Bomber was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin indeed was very haughty and said nothing about service, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that at the last he grunted, "Pray not mention it," and stopped frowning. "Now we are all here." "Now we are all here," said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, at his own hat hanging on the pegs.
Quite a merry gathering, I hope. There is something left for me. The like gourmands to eat and drink. What's that? Tea? No, thank you. A little red wine for me, thank you. And for me, said Thorin.
And raspberry and jam apple tart, said Bifur. In mince and pies and cheese, said Buffer.
And pork and pie and salad, said Bomber.
And more cakes, and ale and coffee if you don't mind, called the other dwarfs through the door.
Put on a few eggs, there's a good fellow. Put on a few eggs, there's a good fellow, Gandalf called after him,
as the hobbit stumped off to the pantries.
And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles.
Seems to know as much about the town side of my landers as I do myself, thought Mr. Baggins. He was feeling positively flummoxed, but he was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he had got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on a big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. Confiscate and debother these dwarfs, he said aloud. Why don't they come and lend a hand? Lo and behold, there stood Bill. Lo and behold, there stood Ballandrae on the door of the kitchen, and Philly and Killy behind them, and before he could say knife they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlour and set out everything afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party with the 13 dwarfs, all around, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireplace, nibbling at a biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look as if there was all perfectly ordinary, and not in the least not an adventurous at all. The dwarfs ate, and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. I suppose you will all stay to supper, he said in his politest, unpressing tones.
Of course, said Thorin, and after, we shan't get through the business till late. We must have some music first. Now, to clear up.
Thereupon the 12 dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made a tall pile of glasses, and plates, and forks, and knives, and spoons, and all things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on the top, which one hand when the hobbit ran off after them, almost squeaking with fright. Please be careful, and please don't trouble, I can manage. But the dwarfs only started to sing. Ship the glasses, crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks, that's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bowls and burn the corks, cut the cloth and tread on the mat, pour the milk on the pantry floor, leave the bones in the bedroom and splash the wine on every door. Dump the clocks in a boiling bowl, pound them up with a thumping pole, and when you're finished, if you have any hole, send them down the hole to roll. And as for Bilbo Baggins ate, so carefully with the plates. And of course they did none of these things. None of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away safe as quick as lightning, while the hobbit was turning round and round in the middle of the kitchen trying to see what they were doing. When they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender smoking a pipe, he was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and whenever he told one to go, it went up the chimney, or behind the clock on the mantelpiece, or underneath the table, or round and round the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent a small smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through each one of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to whoever over the wizard's head. He had a cloud of them about him already, and in the dim light it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood and watched. He loved smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday morning of his smoke rings he had sent up the wind over the hill.
Now, for some music, said Thorin. Bring out the instruments! Killy and Philly rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dorian, Nori and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bomber produced a drum from the hall. Biffa and Buffer went out too and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, "Excuse me, I left mine in the porch." "Just bring mine with you." Just bring mine in with you," said Thorin. They came back with the vials as big as themselves, and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it and the music began at all once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else, and was swept away into dark lands under strange moons, far over the west and very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the rooms from the little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and they still played on. And suddenly, first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the war dwarves in the deep places of the ancient homes. And this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. Far over the misty mountains cold, 2 dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away a break of day to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarfs of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells in places of deep, where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells. For ancient king and elvish lord, there many a gleaming golden hoard they shaped and wrought, and light they caught to hide in gems on hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung the flowerings, stars on crowns they hung, the dragon fire in a twisted wire they meshed the light of moon and sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, 2 dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away a break of day to claim our long forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold where no mandels. They lay, they long, and many a song was sung unheard
by men or elves. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were mourning in the night. The fire was red, its flaming spread. The trees like torches blazed with light. The bells of Dale were ringing, and men looked up with faces pale. Then dragons higher, more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and houses frail. The mountains spoke beneath the moon. The dwarfs, they heard a tramp of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall. Beneath his feet, beneath the moon, far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away ere break of day, to win our harps and gold from him. As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands and by cunning and by magic moving through him. A fierce and a jealous love, a desire of the hearts of the dwarves. Then something tookish woke up inside of him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out. The stars were out in a dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels of the dwarves shining in dark caverns. Suddenly in the wood beyond the water, a flame leapt up, probably lightning a wood fire, and he thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling all the flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was playing Mr. Baggins of Bag End, Underhill, again. He got up trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, and more than half a mind to pretend to, and go and hide behind the beer barrels in the cellar, and not come out again until the dwarfs had gone away. Suddenly he found that the music and the singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him with eyes shining in the dark.
"Where are you going?"
said Colin, in a tone that seemed to show that he guessed.
In the meanwhile,
the hobbit's mind.
However, Bulwer's gentler descendant was reviving in the drawing room.
What about a light?
After a while,
Bilbo,
and a drink, he was reviving. He crept nervously to the door of the parlour. This is what he
dark for
heard.
dark.
Glowing
Business.
speaking.
There are many hours
Some sort
before
of
dawn.
snort or less like that.
Of course.
What do you do?
Bilbo
You think?
sat down in a hurry.
It's very well
missed the
for
stool and
Gandalf to
sat in
talk
the
about
fender,
his
looking over the
hobbit
poker
being
and
fierce.
shovel
One
and
shriek like that in a
trash.
moment of excitement would be enough to
Hush.
wake the dragon and all his
Gandalf.
relatives
Thorn
and kill a lot
speak.
of us.
Let's just
I think it's had more like a fright than excitement. In fact, if it had
Gandalf,
not been for the sign of the
dwarves,
door,
and Mr. Baggins.
I should have been sure we had come to the wrong
We met
house.
together in this house of our
As soon
friend
as I
and fellow
clapped my
conspirator.
eyes on the little fellow
Spoke's
bobbing and
excellent
buffing on the mat.
House of
I had my
our
doubts.
most
He
excellent
looked like a grocer than a
and
burglar.
Audacris Hobbit
Then
made
Mr.
the
Baggins
hair
turned
of
the
his
handle
toes
and
never
went in.
fall
The
out.
took side had won.
All
He
praise
suddenly felt he would
to
go
his
without
wine and
bed and
ale.
breakfast to be
He
thought
paused
fierce.
for breath and for a
And
polite
the little
remark to the
fellow,
Hobbit.
bobbing on the
The
mat,
compliments
almost made him really
quite
fierce.
lost
Many a
on
time
Mr.
afterwards, the
Baggins.
Baggins part regretted
He
what
was
he did now.
wagging
He said to
his
himself,
mouth in
Bill
protest
Moore,
at being
you're
called
a fool.
Audacris
You
and
walked
worst
right
of
in
all
and put your
fellow
foot in.
conspirator.
Pardon me, he said. I have overheard
no
words
noise
that
came
you
out.
were saying.
It was so
I don't pretend to understand what you are
so
talking about, or your reference to
Barbara
burglars,
Dahl.
but I think I am right in
We may attempt to
believing
discuss our
this is what he
plans,
called being
ways,
honesty,
means,
that you
policy,
think
and
I am no
devices.
good. I'll show
We
you.
trust him before the break
I have
of
no
day
signs on
starts
my
our
door.
long journey.
Come to the wrong
Life
house.
in which some of us, or perhaps all
It
of
was
us,
painted
except
this
for our
morning.
friend and counsellor, you genius,
As soon as
Wizard
I saw
Gandalf,
your funny
he never
faces
returned.
on the doorstep, I had my doubts.
It's a solemn
Which is
moment.
the right one?
Our object
Tell me
is
what you want done, and I will try
painted,
it.
well known to us
If I
all.
have to walk from here to the east of the east and fight
Twisted
the
Mr.
wild
Baggins, and
worms in the last
perhaps to
desert.
one or two of the
I have
younger
a great
dwarves. I think I
uncle
should be
once,
right.
Bulwer
to
took
name
and
Killian Philly,
yes,
for instance.
but that was long ago.
The exact situation at the
Going.
moment may require a
Talking
little
about
brief
you,
explanation.
and I assure you there is a mark
This
on the
was
store.
Thorn's style. He
Plenty
was
of
an
excitement,
important
reasonable
dwarf.
reward.
If he had been
No
allowed,
doubt
he
is
would probably
usually
have
read.
gone on like
You
this until
say
he was out of
expert
breath,
treasure hunter instead of
without telling anyone
burglar,
there
if you
had
like.
been
Some of them do.
nothing known
It's
at
all the
all.
same to us.
But he was
Gandalf
so
took
rudely
us to
interrupted.
there with some man
Poor
of the
Bilbo
sword in his
couldn't bear
part,
it any longer.
looking for a job
Being
at
never
once,
to return,
and then that
he
will
began to
arrange
feel
for a
creeping
meeting
up the
here
stairs,
this
and very
Wednesday
soon
at
it
time.
burst out like the whistle
Of
of
course,
an
there's a
engine coming
mark.
out of a tunnel.
Put it there in the
All the
myself.
dwarfs sprang up,
For good
got from the
reasons.
table.
You asked me to
Gandalf struck
find
a
the
blue light from the end of
14th
his
member of
magic
the
staff.
expedition.
The
I chose
firework
Mr.
fire that
Baggins.
wore up a little hobbit to be
Just let
seen
anyone
kneeling on
say I chose the
frog
wrong
shaking
man
like
or
a
wrong
jelly that
house,
was melting.
and you can stop our
He
13
fell
and have
flat
all
on
the
the
bad
floor
luck you
and
like.
kept on calling out,
And go
"Struck
back to
by
your digging
lightning!
coal.
Struck by
He
lightning!"
scowled so angrily at going.
over and over again.
The dwarf
and that
huddled
was all
back
that
in his
could get
chair.
out of him for a long
He
time.
tried to open his mouth
So
to
they
answer the
took him
question.
and
He
laid
turned
him
and
out
frowned
of
at
the
him.
way of the dwarf,
Stuck out his
throwing
bushy
himself
eyebrows
out with a drink in
till
his
Bilbo
hand.
shut his mouth tight with a
They went back
snap.
to their dark business.
That's right, said Gandalf. Let's have no
Trust
more
me, fellow,
argument.
said Gandalf. I sat down again.
I have
It's
chosen
funny
Mr.
quick
Baggins,
bits, and then
that'll
he's
be enough for you all.
one of the best.
If I say he's
one
a
of the
burglar,
best.
burglar he
It's
is.
a dragon
It
in
will
a
be when the
pinch.
time comes.
If you ever see a dragon in a pinch, you will realise that this was only a poetical
There's a lot
exaggeration
more on
of
him than
life
you
being a
guess.
hobbit.
Now do you more than
Even
you
to an old
had
Took's
any
great
idea of.
grand uncle,
You may,
Bilbo,
possibly.
who was so
All look to
huge
thank
for a
me,
hobbit that he could ride
My
a
boy,
horse.
my boy.
He
Press
charged
lamp
the
and let's
ranks
have a
of
little light on this.
goblins of Mount Graham in
On
the
the
Battle
table,
of the
the
Green
light,
Fields,
the big lamp
and
with
knocked
the red
their
shade,
king
he spread out a piece of
Golfing Boy's
parchment
head
and
clean
like
off
a map.
the wooden club.
This was
Sailed
made by
100 yards
Thor,
through the air
my
and went down a
grandfather.
rabbit hole.
Thorin.
And away the battle was
Hidden
won,
answer
and
to the
the
dwarf's
game
exact
of golf
questions.
presented
It's
at
a
the same
plan
moment.
of the mountain. I don't say this will help us much, said Thorn disappointedly after a glance. I remember the mountains well enough and the lands about it. And I know where Mirkwood is, and the withered heath where the great dragons bred. There's a dragon marked in the red on the mountain, said Bowen. It'll be easy enough to find him without that, if we ever arrive there. There's one point you haven't noticed, said the wizard, and that is the secret entrance you see. You see the ruin on the west side and the hand pointing to it from the other ruins. That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. Look at the map at the beginning of the book, and you will see the ruins in red. It will be in the secret ones, said Thorin, but how do we know that it is secret any longer? Old Smaug has lived there long enough to know how to find anything there. He's used to those caves. He may, but he can't have used for years and years. Why? Because he is too small. 5 feet high the door, and there may walk abreast through the ruins, but Smaug could not creep into a hole that size, not even when he was a young dragon. Certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarfs and men of Dale. It seems a great big hole to me, squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience with dragons and only hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and all there hung a large one of the country road with all his favourite walks marked on it in red ink. How could such a large door be kept secret from everybody's outside? Apart from the dragon, he asked. He was only a little hobbit, you must remember. In lots of ways, said Gandalf. But in the ways that has been hidden we don't know about going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess there is a cloaked door, which has been made to look excitingly like the side of the mountain. That is the unusual for dwarves, is it? The usual? Sorry. I think that is right, isn't it? Quite right, said Thorin. Also, went on Gandalf, I forgot to mention that with the map there is a key. A small and curious key. Here it is, he said, and handed it to Thorin, a key with a long barrel and encrypted ward made of silver. Keep it safe. Indeed I will, said Thorin. He fastened it upon a fine chain that hung about his neck and under his jacket. Now things began to look more helpful. This news alters them much more for the better. So far we have no clear idea. We thought of going east as quiet, as careful as we could, as far as the Long Lake, after trouble would begin. Not a long time before that, if I knew anything about the roads, east, interrupted Gandalf. We might be up there by the river running, went on Thorin, taking no notice, and so to the ruins of Dale, the old town in the valley there under the shadow of the mountain. But none of us liked the idea of the front gate. The river runs out of it, and the great cliff at the south of the mountain, and out of it comes the dragon too. Far too often, unless he has changed his habits. That would be no good, said the wizard, but not without a mighty warrior, even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are very busy fighting one another in the distant lands, and the neighborhood heroes are scarce or simply not to be found. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes are used for trees and shields, cradles, or dish covers, and dragons uncomfortable far off, and therefore legendary. That is why I settled on burglary, especially when I remembered the existence of side door. And here's a little bit about Baggins, the burglar, the chosen and selected burglar. It's time to get on with and make some plans. Very well, said Thorin. Supposing the burglar expert gives us some ideas and suggestions. He turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. First, I should like to know a bit more about things, he said, feeling all confused, a bit shaky inside, but so far still, tookishly, determined to go on with things. I mean, about the gold and the dragon, and all that, and how it got there, and who it belongs to, and so on and further. Bless me, said Thorin. Haven't you got a map, and didn't you hear all our song, and haven't you been talking about this for hours? All the same, I should be all plain and clear, said he obstinately, putting on his business manner, usually reserved for people who tried to borrow money off him, and doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional and live up to Gandalf's recommendation. Also, I should like to know about the risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required and repetition, and so forth. By which he meant, what am I going to get out of it, and what am I going to come back alive? Oh, very well, said Thorin. Long ago, my grandfather's Thor time our family was driven out to the far north, and came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my far ancestor, Thrain the Old. But now they mined and they tunnelled and they made hunger halls and greater workshops. In addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south, and were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley overhead into the mountain. They built the merry town of Dale there in those days. Kings used to be sent for our smiths, and reward even the least skilful most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices, and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find for ourselves. Altogether, those were the good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and little to lend, and leisure to make beautiful things just for the fun of it. Not to speak the most marvellous and magical toys, the like of which to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armour and the jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the north. Undoubtedly that was the brought to the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, you know, from men and elves and dwarves, wherever they can find them. And they guard their plunder as they live, which is practically forever, unless they are killed, and never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from the bad. Usually they usually have a good notion for the current market value, and they can't make a thing for themselves, not even a little mend loose scale of their armour. There were lots of dragons in the north in those days, and gold was probably getting scarce up there, with no the dwarves flying south or getting killed, and all the general waste and destruction the dragons could make going from bad to worse. There was a most specially greedy, strong and wicked worm called Smaug. One day he flew up into the air and came south. The first we heard of it was like a noise of a hurricane coming from the north, and the pine trees on the mountains cracking and creaking in the wind. Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside, I was one luckily a fine adventurous lad in those days, and he always wandering about and saved my life that day. Well, from a good way off, the Dre saw the dragon settle down on a mountain in a spout of flame. Then he came down the slopes, and when he reached the woods, they all went up in fire. By the time all the bells were ringing in Dale and the warriors were arming, the dwarves rushed out of their great gate, But there was the dragon waiting for them. None escaped that way. The river rushed up in steam and a fog fell on Dale. And in the fog the dragon came up on them and destroyed most of the warriors. The usual unhappy story. It was only too common in the gate. Those days, when they went back and crept in through the front gate. Rushed out all the halls and lanes and the tunnels and alleys, cellars, mansions and passages. After all that, there were no dwarves left alive inside. And he took all their wealth for himself. Probably for the last of the dragon's way, he has piled up all in a great heap far aside and sleeps on it like a bed. Later he used to crawl out at the great gate and come by night to Dale and carry away people, especially maidens, to eat, until Dale was ruined and all the people were dead or gone. What goes on there now, I don't know for certain, but I don't know supposedly anyone who lives there now. I don't know for certain. Near to the mountains and far on the edge of the lake, Long Lake nowadays. The few of us that were all outside in wets and hiding, and cursed smoke, and they were all unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather with signed beards. They looked very grim, but they said were very little. When I asked how they had got away, and they told me to hold my tongue, and said that one day in the proper time I should know. After that we went away, and we had to earn our livings as best as we could in bread and lands, often enough sinking as low as blacksmith work or even coal mining. But I've never forgotten our stolen treasure, and even now when I will be allowed a good bit of laid by the nail, I'm so badly off. Here, Thorn stroked the gold chain around his neck. We still mean to get it back, and to bring our curses home to Smaug if we can.
I have often wondered about my father's and my grandfather's escape. I see now they must have had a private side door which only they knew about. Apparently they made it on a map. I should like to know how Gandalf got a hold of it, and why it did not come down to it. Me. The rightful heir. I did not get it hold of it. I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather, Thror, was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria by Azog the goblin. Curse his name. Yes, said Thorin. And Thrain, your father, went away on the 21st of April, 100 years ago last Thursday, and has never been seen by you since. True, said Thorin. Well, your father gave me this to give to you. And if I chosen my own time and hold a hand coming over, you can hardly blame me, considering the trouble I had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he never told me yours. So on this whole, I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is, said he, handing the map to Thorin. I don't understand, said Thorin, and Bilbo felt he would have liked to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard, slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed, and lots of adventures of a most unpleasant sort he had. But he never got near the mountain. He got there, I don't know. How he got there, I don't know. But I found him in a prisoner in the dungeons of the Necromancer.
Whatever are you doing there? Asked Thorn with a shudder, and all the dwarfs shivered. Never you mind. I was finding things out as usual, and a needlessly dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped and tried to save your father. But it was too late. He was rootless and wandering. He had forgotten everything except the map and the key.
We have long ago paid the goblins a visit, said Moria, said Thorin. We must give a thought to the Necromancer.
Don't be absurd.
He's an enemy far beyond the powers of all the dwarfs put together. If they could all be collected again from the corners of the world. The one thing your father wished was a son to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountains are more than big enough tasks for you.
Hear, said Bilbo, and I accidentally said it out loud. Hear what? They all said, turning suddenly towards him, and they all flustered, and they answered. Hear what I've got to say. What's that? They asked. Well, I should say that you ought to go east and have a look around. After all, there's a side door in the dungeons. Dragons must sleep sometimes, I suppose. If you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you'll think of something, and, well, I don't know if you think I've talked long enough for one night. If you see what I mean. What about bed, and another start, and all that? I will give you a good breakfast before you go. Before we go? I suppose you mean said Thorn. "Aren't you the burglar? And some sitting on the doorstep your job? Not to speak of getting inside the door. But I agree about bed and breakfast. I'd like 6 eggs with my ham, and we're starting on a bread journey. Fried and a poached. And mind you don't break 'em." After all the others had ordered their breakfast without so as much as a please, which annoyed Bilbo very much, they all got up. The Hobbit had to find a room for them all, and filled all his spare bedrooms and beds, and to make them chairs and sofas before he got them all stowed and went on his own very little bed, tired and not altogether happy. One thing he did make his mind up about was not to bother to get up very early and cook everybody else's breakfast. The tookishness was wearing off, and he was not quite so sure what he was going to do on any journey in the morning. As he lay in the bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself in the best bedroom next to him. "Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to find our long forgotten gold." Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after the break of day when he woke up.